The only people that I know who aren't are people who are unhappy in life and been a big disappointment to them.
At the peak of his success, Dan Blocker had everything most actors spend a lifetime chasing: stability, respect, and a role that made him feel permanent. That's what made the ending so jarring. There was no buildup that felt dangerous, no moment that screamed tragedy ahead. Just a sense that things would soon return to normal. They never did. What followed was sudden, devastating, and left behind a silence that grew louder with time. Dolphia Blocker could have become the public face of grief. Instead, she chose something far rarer: disappearance. Her refusal to participate in the narrative turned their final chapter into one of Hollywood's quietest tragedies. A giant raised in hard times. Little Joe might win people over with his charm, humor, and good looks, but it was Hoss who truly captured hearts. The big, shy, slightly gullible, but endlessly lovable Cartwright brother had something special. There was a softness to him, a humility and innocence mixed with that puppy dog charm that made him impossible not to love. And that same spirit came straight from the man who played him. Dan Blocker entered the world already larger than life. Born on December 10, 1928, in DeKalb, Texas, he weighed an unbelievable 14 pounds. To this day, he still holds the record as the largest baby ever born in Bowie County. In a way, his life started as a story people couldn't help but tell, and that theme never really went away. When he was still young, his parents, Ora Shack Blocker and Mary Arizona Blocker, moved the family to the small town of O'Donnell, about 40 miles south of Lubbock. Shack had been a farmer, but after losing everything during the Great Depression, he scraped together enough money to open a grocery store. The family lived in rooms behind the shop, and Dan helped out however he could, often carrying groceries to customers' cars. Shack used to joke with friends that he should pay them to hire Dan because the boy was so big he kept breaking things in the store. What no one realized back then was that his size would one day become his greatest advantage. O'Donnell was tiny, with a population of around 800 people, surrounded by wide-open ranch land. Saturday nights were the big event, and oddly enough, the entertainment often involved Dan himself. Word spread that if anyone wanted to test their strength, Dan would be waiting. They'd rope off part of Main Street, and he'd take on anyone brave enough to step up. According to Blocker, he never lost a fight. Even as a teenager, he weighed about 275 pounds, give or take, and he knew exactly what he was capable of. He was so confident in his strength that he once claimed he could beat heavyweight champion Floyd Patterson if he just had a few months to train and lose some extra weight. That confidence wasn't just talk. At 13, he joined the Texas Military Institute and played linebacker on the football team. He was so good that he earned a scholarship to Sul Ross State University, where he planned to study English and keep playing football. By the time he was 18, he stood 6'3" and weighed nearly 300 pounds, and he would grow even bigger as the years went on. But it was a twist of fate that changed everything. The school's drama club needed someone strong enough to move heavy dummy props for a production of Arsenic and Old Lace. Dan fit the job perfectly. Then someone suggested he step into a small role as Teddy Brewster, the eccentric nephew of the play's murderous aunts. That single moment on stage changed his life. The audience reaction, the energy, the feeling of being seen, it grabbed him completely. He switched his major from English to theater and never looked back. After graduating, he turned down offers to play professional football and headed east to chase a dream he hadn't even known he had. He worked summer stock and repertory theater, slowly building his craft until he landed a small role on Broadway in King Lear. It was the start of something bigger, though the path would take a detour he never planned for. In late 1950, Dan Blocker was drafted into the U.S. Army during the Korean War. He went through basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, followed by 9 months of training in Sapporo, Japan. From there, he was sent to Korea, serving with Company F, 2nd Battalion, 179th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Infantry Division. By the time his service ended, he had risen to the rank of sergeant. His unit was stationed near the Jamestown line, close to Chorwon, an area that is now part of North Korea. In March, they were pulled into intense fighting at a place called Outpost Erie. Then, on May 25th, their patrol walked straight into a communist ambush deep behind enemy lines. Outnumbered and pinned down, the Americans chose to fight. When one soldier was wounded and trapped under heavy fire, Blocker held his position for more than 4 hours, returning fire against machine guns, mortars, and small arms. His actions kept the enemy at bay, even though the wounded soldier did not survive. The fighting didn't stop there. From mid-June through the end of the month, his unit battled at Erie, Old Baldy, and Pork Chop Hill, before defending Hill 223. After 209 straight days on the front lines, the division was finally pulled back in July. Blocker, who had been acting as first sergeant, ended up hospitalized for wounds he suffered during combat. He was credited with saving the lives of others in his unit and was sent home in August 1952. One of the men who served under him, Gordon Apts, later spoke about Sergeant Blocker with deep respect. He described him as strong, athletic, loud in the best way, friendly with everyone, and a natural leader. Apts said Blocker could crush a beer can between 2 fingers and still make time to look out for every man under his command. That same year, Dan married Dolphia Parker. With a new wife and a sense of responsibility, he returned to college and earned a master's degree in dramatic arts. Soon after, with a growing family to support, twin daughters Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, and sons David and Dirk, he took a job teaching high school English and drama in Sonora, Texas. Later, he taught 6th grade in New Mexico. Each move pushed him a little farther west, step by step, quietly guiding him toward the life he was always meant to live. Hollywood's biggest misunderstood star. Dan Blocker settled into married life with the same steadiness he brought to everything else. He loved being a teacher, loved being around kids, and genuinely enjoyed sharing his passion for acting and language with them. It's easy to imagine that he changed some lives along the way without ever knowing it. People who knew him all seemed to agree on one thing. Dan had a big heart. He could be quick-tempered at times, but he was just as quick to apologize and admit when he was wrong. When he moved his family to California, it wasn't about chasing fame or soaking up attention. The plan was simple and practical. Dan enrolled at UCLA to work toward a PhD in dramatic arts, and he continued teaching while he studied. Acting was still something he loved, but it wasn't yet the center of his life. That began to change in the mid-1950s when he started auditioning for television roles to help bring in extra money. Westerns were everywhere at the time, and his size and presence made him a natural fit. He landed small roles, one after another, slowly building experience in front of the camera. Around this time, Stanley Kubrick even tried to cast him in Dr. Strangelove, after Peter Sellers backed out of playing Major T.J. King Kong. But Blocker's agent turned down the script, and the role eventually went to Slim Pickens. It was one of those missed chances that only make sense in hindsight. In 1957, Blocker appeared in a Three Stooges short called Outer Space Jitters, playing a character known as the Goon, credited under the name Don Blocker. That same year, he showed up as a bartender in an episode of Sheriff of Cochise. Something clicked. Being back on set, slipping into different characters, reminded him of just how much he loved acting. From there, the work started coming steadily. He appeared in popular shows like Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, and Maverick, where he even got to show off his natural comedic timing. In 1958, he made an appearance on Walt Disney's Zorro and landed a regular role on a short-lived series called Cimarron City. The show didn't last long, and at the time, it probably felt like another setback. But in reality, it was the break he didn't know he needed. Its cancellation left him free to take on the role that would define his life. When producer David Dortort chose him to play Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza, everything changed. Dan put his doctoral studies on hold and became a full-time actor, mostly because the role demanded everything he had. And it was worth it. If Little Joe was the heartthrob of the show, Hoss was its heartbeat, the emotional center, the steady soul that held the Cartwright family together. What's surprising is that Bonanza wasn't an instant hit. When it first aired, ratings were so low that NBC seriously considered canceling it after just one season. Part of the problem was its Saturday night time slot, where it had to compete with Perry Mason. During its first year, the show didn't even crack the top 30. But the network believed in it. They moved Bonanza to Sunday nights at 9 p.m., and that's when everything finally clicked. The audience grew, the ratings soared, and the show began the long run that would eventually stretch for 13 more seasons. Chevrolet came on as a sponsor, which gave the ratings another big push in Season 2. Even so, the show nearly disappeared before it ever had a chance to succeed, mostly because it was expensive to produce. NBC executive Thomas Sarnoff later revealed that the network in New York had planned to cancel the show after the first 13 episodes because it had gone over budget. Filming Bonanza in color cost about $105,000 per episode in that first year, a huge amount at the time. Sarnoff stepped in and promised he could keep the production on budget, and he did. With that, Bonanza survived and then exploded, becoming one of the most beloved shows in television history, with Dan Blocker's Hoss right at the center of it all. From the moment America met Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza, something clicked. Here was this towering man, 6'4", over 300 pounds, who looked like he had walked straight out of a legend. Yet instead of being a fearsome brute, Hoss was gentle, awkward, funny, and endlessly kind. He tripped over his words, he stumbled into trouble, he wore his heart on his sleeve, and viewers instantly fell in love. The nickname Hoss itself was a playful twist on the word horse, a folksy way of saying big as a hoss. It fit perfectly, but what truly sealed the deal was how completely Dan Blocker disappeared into the role. To millions of fans, Hoss Cartwright did not feel like a character. He felt like a real person. And that is where the great contradiction begins. Because in real life, Dan Blocker was nothing like the slow, simple-minded ranch hand he portrayed. He was highly educated, holding a master's degree in theater. Before his acting career took off, he had worked as a school teacher. He was thoughtful, well-read, deeply religious as a Free Methodist, and politically progressive. He supported liberal causes and even backed Eugene McCarthy. The man behind the scenes was sharp, reflective, and intellectually curious. Yet, despite their differences, Blocker and Hoss shared one enormous similarity: a powerful sense of compassion. Blocker believed deeply in kindness, fairness, and standing up for what was right. That belief quietly shaped everything he brought to Hoss. Kids sensed it immediately. Parents did too. Hoss never felt manipulative or calculating. There was nothing hidden about him. What you saw was what you got. A good man trying his best in a complicated world. Early in Bonanza's run, Blocker struggled with how deeply he was sinking into the role. As he later admitted, during the first few seasons, he often felt as if he and Hoss were the same person. He spent so much time building the character, studying him, and trying to understand how he thought, that the lines began to blur. It was not until around the 5th season that Blocker finally felt confident enough to separate himself from Hoss. Once he fully understood who Hoss was, he could step into the character each morning and step away from him each night, leaving him behind on the soundstage. Still, Hoss never stopped living somewhere inside him. Blocker often kept in mind a quote from the 18th century Quaker missionary Stephen Grelle, that if there is any kindness to be shown or any good to be done, it should be done now, because we only pass this way once. That philosophy became the emotional backbone of Hoss Cartwright. Every gentle gesture, every awkward apology, every moment of loyalty flowed from that simple idea. Off camera, Blocker's toughness revealed itself in unexpected ways. During one filming session, he was thrown violently from a horse and fractured his collarbone. Instead of heading to the hospital, he did something almost unbelievable. He set the bone himself. Then he climbed back on and finished the scene. Only afterward did he take time off to recover. The irony was that during his recovery, he gained some weight, and when he returned to set, the same horse that had thrown him could no longer carry him. It was a perfect example of Blocker's quiet grit. He did not talk much about being a Korean War veteran, but he had been decorated for his service. War changed him in lasting ways, especially when it came to guns. Although Bonanza was built around shootouts, outlaws, and frontier justice, Blocker personally despised firearms. He openly said that while he had to carry a gun on television, he wanted nothing to do with them in real life. His hatred of guns began one terrifying night in Korea, sitting on a mountain, realizing how powerless a human being becomes when someone else holds a weapon. That moment shattered any illusion of invincibility he once had. Before the war, he had enjoyed hunting. After the war, he owned no guns at all. He would not even allow his sons to go hunting. To Blocker, shooting animals for sport made no sense. He believed that unless animals could be trained to shoot back, calling it sport was dishonest. His stance was firm, thoughtful, and deeply personal. This created an interesting contrast. On screen, Hoss sometimes reached for his holster. Off-screen, the man playing him rejected violence as a solution. On the Bonanza set, Blocker found something rare in Hollywood: a genuine family. He grew especially close to Lorne Greene and Michael Landon.
In the early days of the series, when I was trying to find this character and I was really working at it.
Landon, still young at the time, already had strong opinions about storytelling, character direction, and where the show should go. He could be stubborn. He could argue with producers and network executives. Some people found him difficult. But Blocker saw something else: passion. Landon cared deeply about the show and its characters, and over time, that intensity helped shape Bonanza into something stronger. The cast spent enormous amounts of time together, often from early morning until late at night, 5 days a week, and they still chose to socialize outside of work. Their bond ran so deep that Blocker served as best man at Michael Landon's wedding to Lynn Noe. Though Bonanza dominated his schedule, Blocker did manage to appear in a few films, including Come Blow Your Horn and Lady in Cement, both alongside Frank Sinatra. Still, television was his home, and Hoss was his legacy. Despite his fame, Blocker never forgot where he came from.
When's the last time you were in Texas, Dan?
Oh, I was in Dallas about a month ago.
Oh, that recently.
Yeah.
He moved his parents to California to be closer to him, but his hometown of O'Donnell, Texas, never stopped claiming him as their own. People back home smiled at the memory of the quiet, studious boy who always had a book in his hands. To them, it was almost surreal to watch that same kid riding across the Ponderosa every Sunday night, beaming into millions of living rooms. In the end, Dan Blocker did something rare. He created a character who felt timeless. Hoss Cartwright was not just a sidekick. He was not just comic relief. He was a symbol of decency in a rough-and-tumble world. And behind that symbol stood a man who truly believed in kindness, who understood suffering, and who chose gentleness anyway. The star who hated stardom. By the mid-1960s, Dan Blocker had reached a place most actors only dream about. Fans adored him. Fellow performers respected him. Children looked at Hoss Cartwright and saw someone they wanted to grow up to be. Yet, in a twist that feels almost poetic, Blocker himself had very little interest in being famous. He loved acting, he loved performing, he loved the craft. What he did not love was being recognized. Blocker and his wife, Dolphia Parker, made a conscious decision to live quietly. While other television stars were buying lavish estates in Beverly Hills or hosting glamorous parties, the Blockers chose a modest 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home in Northridge, a quiet suburb about 20 miles from Paramount Studios. It was comfortable, practical, and far removed from the glitter of Hollywood. Because to Dan Blocker, acting was a job. He was not chasing stardom. He was not trying to become a celebrity icon. He was working to support his family and to do something he genuinely enjoyed. The massive attention that came with playing Hoss felt strange to him, almost uncomfortable. He often seemed genuinely puzzled that millions of people cared so deeply about a fictional cowboy he played on television. That discomfort only grew as Bonanza's popularity exploded. Strangers would stop him in public. Some would grab his arm. Others would hug him without asking. Many wanted autographs. Most meant well, but Blocker struggled with the constant physical closeness. He did not like being touched by people he did not know. He valued personal space. He valued privacy. And privacy, once lost, is almost impossible to get back. The hardest part was what fame did to his family life. Blocker and Parker had 4 children, and Dan desperately wanted them to grow up feeling normal. But even something as simple as taking the kids out for ice cream could turn into a public event. Fans of all ages would gather around. Kids would stare. Parents would point. Conversations would be interrupted. The quiet family moment he hoped for would slowly disappear. He understood the admiration, but that did not mean he enjoyed the consequences. Still, no matter how exhausting his schedule became, Blocker never stopped trying to be present as a father. At home, he was exactly what you might imagine, a massive man with an even bigger playful streak. Weighing around 260 pounds, he used his size not to intimidate, but to clown around. After long days on set, he would burst through the front door and jokingly shove past his sons just to be the first one to reach their electric racetrack. It was ridiculous, it was childish, and it was pure Dan Blocker. That silly obsession with racing toy cars revealed something essential about him. Beneath the towering frame and booming voice was a man who never lost his sense of play. A man who knew how to be serious when needed, but who also understood the value of laughter. The Blocker household reflected that balance. Yes, they had a swimming pool. Yes, their driveway held some nice cars. Parker drove a 1963 Cadillac. Dan had a brand new Corvette Stingray. But none of it was about showing off. There were no marble statues, no gold-plated gates. no Hollywood excess. It was a family home. And perhaps the most telling detail of all was Dan's social circle. Instead of surrounding himself with famous actors and industry power players, Blocker stayed close to the people who had known him before fame arrived. Former school teachers, old friends from Texas, people who remembered him as a thoughtful, bookish young man long before America knew him as Hoss Cartwright. He and Parker stayed far away from big Hollywood parties. That whole scene just wasn't for them. They weren't chasing connections or rubbing elbows with the right people. They preferred quiet nights, familiar faces, and conversations that actually meant something. Fame may have changed how the world saw Dan Blocker, but it never changed who he was. Instead of bending himself to fit celebrity life, he simply stepped away from it. No gated communities, no hidden mansion in the hills. He packed up and moved to another country. Blocker made the remarkable decision to relocate his family to Lugano, Switzerland. The idea did not come from a business deal or a tax strategy. It began with something simple and almost poetic: a magazine. Blocker was an avid reader of National Geographic, and one particular feature on the lake regions of northern Italy and southern Switzerland stopped him in his tracks. Page after page of mountains, water, and old European towns stirred something deep inside him. He had already visited Europe once with his wife, Dolphia Blocker, and after seeing those photographs, he told her that if they ever returned, they absolutely had to see that lake region. Years later, they did. In 1970, the Blocker family traveled through Switzerland and northern Italy, visiting places like Lake Como, Lake Maggiore, and finally Lugano. And somewhere along that journey, something clicked. Lugano did not just feel beautiful. It felt right. Blocker would later say it was the prettiest place he had ever seen. More importantly, it felt like home. The town offered something Blocker had been craving for years: peace, no crowds, no autograph seekers, no strangers grabbing his arm in grocery stores, just quiet streets, mountain air, and a slower pace of life. The practical pieces fell into place quickly. The family found an American school in Lugano for the children. The kids began learning new languages. Europe suddenly became their extended backyard, with neighboring countries only a short train ride away. By 1970, the decision was made. The Blockers were starting a new chapter in Switzerland. Blocker still had obligations in the United States, of course. Bonanza was one of the biggest shows in television history, and he remained committed to it. But his plan was simple. Whenever he was not actively filming, he would return to Switzerland to be with his family. For him, the move was not about escape. It was about preservation. There were rumors almost immediately. Some people assumed he had left America for financial reasons. Others speculated about taxes, investments, or secret deals. Blocker quietly dismissed all of it. Bonanza had already made him a millionaire. Living overseas actually meant higher taxes and the complication of dual citizenship. If anything, Switzerland cost him more money, not less. Money was never the point. What truly drew him in was the quiet, the anonymity, the chance to walk down the street as a normal man. There was also a small, almost humorous detail that worked in his favor. Bonanza did air on Swiss television, but only in German. And in southern Switzerland, where Italian was the dominant language, very few people watched the show, which meant that in Lugano, Dan Blocker was not Hoss Cartwright. He was just Dan. That anonymity was priceless. Like fellow Western star James Arness of Gunsmoke, Blocker had never been comfortable with celebrity culture. He did not enjoy premieres. He did not chase headlines. He had no interest in becoming a Hollywood personality. He wanted a life, a real one. In Lugano, he found it. He could focus on being a husband, a father, a private citizen. He could watch his children grow without cameras and crowds constantly intruding. He could sit in a cafe without being interrupted. He could breathe. It was worlds away from the dusty trails of the Ponderosa Ranch, worlds away from sound stages and studio lights. And that distance mattered, because while millions of people saw Dan Blocker as a towering cowboy every Sunday night, the man himself was quietly choosing a very different identity. Not as a star, not as an icon, but as a husband who loved his wife, a father who wanted normalcy for his kids, and a thoughtful gentleman who simply wanted some peace in a beautiful corner of the world. Switzerland gave him that, and for Dan Blocker, that quiet life meant more than any amount of fame ever could. The awful ending and tragic death of Dan Blocker and his wife. In 1972, Dan Blocker returned to the United States to begin work on what would become the final season of Bonanza. But something was wrong. Those around him could see it. Blocker felt weak, drained, unusually tired. The big man who had once seemed indestructible no longer had his usual energy. Concerned, he went to the hospital, where doctors discovered that his gallbladder needed to be removed. The procedure itself was considered routine. A cholecystectomy was, and still is, one of the most commonly performed surgeries in America. Millions undergo it every year. There was no reason to believe anything would go wrong. Blocker had endured far tougher situations in his life, including combat in Korea. Compared to that, this felt manageable. The surgery appeared to go smoothly. Afterward, Blocker believed he was finally free from the gallstone pain that had troubled him for years. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of relief. He was sent home to recover, optimistic about getting back to work and finishing the season. Then, only hours later, everything changed. Blocker suddenly became dizzy. He complained of severe pain. Alarmed, his wife, Dolphia, rushed him back to the hospital. He never came back out. Later that day, Dan Blocker died from a pulmonary embolism. A blood clot had traveled to his lungs, blocking a major artery. The death was sudden, unexpected, devastating. One moment, he was alive and planning his future. The next, he was gone. Dan Blocker was just 43 years old. The shock rippled outward instantly. His wife lost her partner. 4 children lost their father. The cast of Bonanza lost a brother. Michael Landon and Lorne Green, his closest friends, were shattered. And millions of fans around the world struggled to comprehend how someone who felt so solid, so permanent, could vanish overnight, at the height of his career, at the height of his life. After Dan Blocker died so suddenly, Dolphia faced a crossroads. She could have remained in the public eye. She could have given interviews. She could have turned her husband's fame into her own platform. She chose none of it. Instead, Dolphia stepped completely away from the spotlight. She focused on raising their children, protecting their privacy, preserving Dan's memory with dignity. She never remarried. She never sought attention. She never tried to rewrite history. She lived quietly and deliberately, just as she and Dan had always preferred. Because Dolphia avoided the media so completely, much of what is known about her later years remains vague. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Peace mattered more to her than public curiosity. In time, she passed away quietly as well, leaving behind children and grandchildren who carried forward the values she and Dan had lived by.